Part 23. I've seen unreasonable, but I've never seen such unreasonable. Pu Qiutai had been in the palace for more than 2 months, and the original hot summer weather was gradually getting cooler. This day got up early in the light rain, dripping, to the morning. It slowly turned bigger, but it was not wind and rain, unhurried, bearing a bit of Zhongnan plum yellow rain style. So Pu Qiutai moved the fun. Regardless of the persuasion of the hibiscus and liulu, insisted on wearing a coat and a hat, out of the Yunhai Palace to the Imperial Garden. Where did Farong dare to let him go out alone? In the end, she sent the Honglian and Yulan too to follow. When he arrived at the Imperial Garden, he saw that those flowers and trees were shrouded in the rain, but there was a different style. The two were amazed, and said with a smile, "Mother has always been good at poetry. This Imperial Garden in the rain is a good scenery, why not give a poem? When the Emperor comes over later, he will be happy to show the Emperor." Pu Qiutai said with a smile. The Queen is seriously ill, and the Emperor should also fulfill his responsibilities as a husband these days. Wouldn't it be good for us to be free in the Yunhai Palace? What are you expecting him to come over? Honglian and Yulan glanced at each other, knowing that during the days when the Queen was seriously ill, the Emperor couldn't care about it. But it made the master's heart bloom. Honglian has a straight temperament and a fast mouth, and in the end she couldn't help but say, "Mother, the people in this harem rely on the Emperor's favor. Haven't you seen that the Emperor hasn't come over in the past few days, and the Internal Affairs Office has neglected our Yunhai Palace a lot? What's the matter if you're sluggish? The truth is that they used to be too enthusiastic to bear. Now that there is nothing lacking in the Yunhai Palace, they just don't care about us for a year, and they can't be hungry or cold. Who still expects them to come over?" Listening to Pu Qiutai's words, Honglian and Yulan were a little speechless. Yes, this is a master who has no quarrel with the world. What else can they say as palace maids? The three of them wore flowers around the trees, and suddenly saw that the vision in front of them was broadened. And an arch bridge was erected on the blue waves, enveloped in smoke and rain, and there was a bit of the taste of the water town in the south of the Zhongnan. Pu Qiutai stopped. Stood in place for a while, he sighed and said, "In our Zhongnan, there are such arch bridges everywhere. After coming to the capital, but I really didn't see it a few times. I didn't expect to hit it by mistake today. I saw it here again. This must be a map made by Zhongnan craftsmen. The bridges in the north are atmospheric and stable. Rarely so beautiful and exquisite." As he spoke, he stepped on the bridge and looked around, only to see that in the distance in the lush greenery, a corner of the cornice suddenly appeared. And he couldn't help but wonder, what is that? It doesn't look like a pavilion or something like that. There are also palaces and pavilions in the Imperial Garden? Yulan looked at it and said with a smile, "It's a Buddhist hall." Mother has not been to the Imperial Garden since he entered the palace. Before the summer heat has not disappeared, now the autumn wind is rising, the sky is cool. Which day to see the weather is good, should take the young master and the girl to come over for a walk. The Imperial Garden is huge, there are also a few pavilions. Whether it is to listen to the rain or enjoy the snow, it is an excellent place. Honglian also smiled on the side. Yes. The Emperor is also worried about the border war and the Queen's illness these days, otherwise I am afraid that he would have brought my mother over early, every time in the middle of the month. The Emperor loves to come to the Feihong Pavilion in the garden, which is located in a high place, and it is best to see the moonlight. While the two were talking, they saw that Pu Qiutai was going to the Buddha Hall, so they hurriedly stopped and said, "Mother, don't go to this Buddha Hall. This is the place where concubine Wei Shu practiced before her death. And the concubine mother passed away in this Buddha Hall a year ago, because there was a message in the palace, so the Queen Mother was a little unhappy. This is already very clear. If it weren't for Pu Qiutai's ignorance of things in the harem, Yulan would not have understood it so clearly. After seeing Pu Qiutai stunned for a moment, he smiled and said, "My Buddha is compassionate, but I will also be burdened by rumors. It is really pitiful and lamentable. I don't know how long no one has come to this Buddhist hall and wait for me to go in and pay respects." Honglian and Yulan were stunned for a moment, and were about to speak again, when they heard Pu Qiutai smile and said, "Needless to say, when I was in Jiangnan, I often lived in the mountain temple. Got up early to read a few volumes of scriptures, or talked about meditation and chess with the masters." While speaking, he got off the bridge. Yulan and Honglian couldn't stop it. They couldn't help but sigh, looked around. Fortunately, no one walked around in this rainy day, but they were not afraid of being seen. The three of them pushed open the mottled main door that had already fallen off the paint, only to see that the courtyard was still neatly cleaned up, but there was no one in sight. They didn't know where the palace maids and eunuchs who were responsible for cleaning up and cleaning here in Suri Li had gone. Pu Qiutai didn't have the vigilance of the two palace maids. So she came to the outside of the hall along the steps, stretched out his hand and pushed it gently, only to hear the sound of squeak, squeak, made people's teeth ache. And then the two doors slowly opened to the side. At this time, I suddenly heard an exclamation in the hall, and then a familiar childish voice said angrily, "What person? His Royal Highness Crown Prince?" Pu Qiutai, Honglian and Yulan were not trivial, and they looked at the child who jumped up from the ground in a daze. It took a long time for Honglian to come back to her senses, and she said in surprise, "Your Highness, why are you here?" Xia Dongming's face was gloomy, his eyes fell on Pu Qiutai's face. And he said coldly, "When? Why is the concubine here?" Although he is the crown prince, but in terms of reason, since Pu Qiutai has been crowned a concubine, it stands to reason that he should call him concubine when, but he is inexplicably jealous of the other party in his heart, and he feels that this is a man, so he can't call this concubine. Honglian and Yulan glanced at each other, and they all wisely chose to be silent. They knew very well, I am afraid that Pu Qiutai would never want others to call him like his mother. There are many temples in the south of Jiangnan, and I often live in the mountain temple, and today I accidentally walked here, and when I saw the Buddha hall, I wanted to come and pay my respects. But I didn't expect to meet His Royal Highness Crown Prince. After Pu Qiutai was surprised, he regained his composure and explained lightly. Xia Dongming didn't seem to believe it. His eyes became more and more gloomy. Pu Qiutai ignored him and came to the statue of Guanyin Bodhisattva in the middle of the Buddhist hall and saw that there was a box of brand new sandalwood on the Buddha case. So he took out 3 sticks, lit them and inserted them into the incense burner, and worshipped religiously. When Xia Dongming saw his style, he only felt that he was not going to stay. But His Royal Highness Crown Prince, being left here like air, it's not a thing. Therefore, although he was not reconciled, he still stomped his feet and turned to leave. Your Highness has the heart to pray for the Queen Mother, and you can recite the Jizo Sutra in the honorific name of Jizo Bodhisattva. Pu Qiutai didn't raise his eyelids. But when Xia Dongming walked to the door, he suddenly said something. Xia Dongming turned his head to look at him, didn't say anything, and ran away. Mother knows that His Royal Highness is here to pray for the Queen's mother? It wasn't until he left the Buddha hall that Honglian asked Pu Qiutai curiously. She saw him nodding and he said softly, "A rebellious child like the prince, if it weren't for the Queen's illness that made him really helpless. How could he think of the Buddha hall here? This Buddha hall is said to have been very effective." Yulan sighed faintly, "But because the Queen Mother doesn't like it, so no one has come over. And finally because it's in the Imperial Garden, there are still people cleaning up. otherwise I don't know what it will be like to be dilapidated. Alright, let's go back to. Pu Qiutai looked up at the benevolent statue of Guanyin Bodhisattva, sighed faintly for a long time, and after saying it softly, he turned around and walked out the door. The rain was much lighter, only a little bit remained, and in the distance were a few maidenhair trees with yellow leaves, enveloped in smoke and rain, as beautiful as a dream. If it was a dream, it would be nice to wake up and everything would be the same. Pu Qiutai looked at the maidenhair tree in the distance in a daze, but the rain fell on his face, and the cold touch clearly told him, all this is a reality, not a dream. When he returned to the Yunhai Palace, the rain had stopped. Pu Qiutai looked at the autumn colors after the rain in the courtyard, and his heavy mood was slightly relieved. Just now, you were clamoring to go to the Imperial Garden with me, but now that the rain has stopped, why don't you come out to play? Lu Liu smiled slightly, walked down the steps to his side and whispered, didn't the two children come out to play for a while? Somehow, when they saw His Royal Highness Crown Prince outside the door, they were scared after all, so they entered the house, and they were probably practicing calligraphy at this time. No wonder. Pu Qiutai sighed, thinking that the little prince's heart was too cool, right? Actually, hated Shanyan until now. Fortunately, the two children are sensible and never go out easily, otherwise I am afraid that he will find a loophole, and it is possible to be beaten to death. Thinking of this, that little bit of good mood is gone, and I am still protecting the two of them now, but one day the prince is going to be the emperor. If he still holds a grudge at that time, I will die. The two children must not fall into his hands. How can I think of a way, after a few years? It is better to let the emperor be gracious and send the two of them out. Not to mention that Pu Qiutai is secretly planning here. Saying that in the Tai Ning Palace, the Queen Mother rarely woke up from her slumber, and saw Xia Dongming guarding her side. The most noble woman in the world couldn't help but shed 2 lines of tears. Gently stroked the top of his head and said, Ming'er is a hard worker. Since birth, I haven't seen your mother. The emperor handed you over to the palace to raise. Now it seems that this is also wrong. There are not many days left in the palace, my child. What can you do? Don't say this. Make His Royal Highness Crown Prince sad. Qingbi hurriedly walked over and said with a forced smile, Mother has eaten more today than yesterday. Isn't this a sign that she is better? It can be seen that the medicine of Dr. Kong is useful. The emperor also said that the famous doctor found by the general is coming to Beijing. And the mother still doesn't know the general's heart? He said yes, it must be an excellent doctor, otherwise he wouldn't be so respected. It can be seen that God is also helping mother. The queen smiled. She is a very smart person. How could she not know the saying that, if you can cure the disease, you can't cure your life? It's just that I saw my adopted son looking at him with a blank look at him, and his eyebrows and eyes were full of expectation, but he couldn't say this negative word. Seeing that his hair was still a little wet, he chuckled and said, Went out to play in the rain? The rain was still falling unhurriedly before I went to bed. But now it has stopped. Xia Dongming nodded, thought about it and whispered, Wait for the Queen Mother's body to get better, and my son will take you out for a walk. Isn't concubine Wen's body notoriously weak? He dares to get drenched in the rain. Why is the Queen Mother not better than him? Concubine Wen? The queen was stunned for a moment. And then she smiled and said, Have you seen Master Pu? Where did you meet? My son was depressed, so I went to the Imperial Garden for a stroll. And I happened to meet him. Xia Dongming thought about it, and finally hesitated. Don't worry, the Queen Mother, you will be fine. My son will recite the Jizo Sutra and the honorific title of Jizo Bodhisattva for you from today on. How do you know this? The queen looked at her adopted son suspiciously. and then smiled slightly. Did Master Pu tell you? Strange, didn't the Queen Mother hear that you were very resentful of him? When did you listen to him like that? How could the son listen to him? He's just a male concubine of his father. Huh, it's too late to take care of himself. How can his son take care of him? When Xia Dongming said this, he stood up abruptly and whispered. The Queen Mother said this, it's time to rest, and my son won't disturb you. Watching the little guy run out of smoke, the queen pondered for a long time, and said to Qingbi, go and call the personal eunuch who followed the prince, and the palace wants to ask him a few words. Seeing that the Mid-Autumn Festival is approaching, the weather is getting cooler and cooler. God will also have fun. The sky is clear for several days, and there are white clouds floating in the blue sky, which makes people feel relaxed and happy when they see it. A wisp of piano sound came intermittently from the Yunhai Palace, although the tune was melodious, but it could be detected that the skills were still immature. Xia Dongming stood behind the tree, and when he heard the song, he squinted his eyes at the little eunuch Xiao Dingji beside him, and said in a deep voice, you say, who is this playing the piano? Is it Zhu Shanyan or his sister? Xiao Dingji said with a smile, it should be his sister. This tone is strange and melodious, and there is no bit of arrogance of a man to kill the quartet. What does he want the man to do with the arrogance of killing the quartet? Will the Qing dynasty be restored? Xia Dongming snorted and glanced at Xiao Dingji. It's good to learn some of concubine Wen's flexible and kind temperament. Xiao Dingji heard that this was a sweat, and secretly glanced at the master from the corner of his eye. Thinking to himself, Mom, where did this come from? What does His Royal Highness Crown Prince want people to be flexible and kind? Do you still want to be like the Emperor persecuting concubine Wen? And in the future, he will also play a play about forcing a man to be a concubine? Just thinking about it, I heard the voice of a palace maid. Sister Qingbi is here? But what does the queen have to say? I'm going to invite concubine Wen. Aunt Qingbi? How did she come over? Xia Dongming frowned but heard Qingbi smile and said, the Queen Mother ordered me to invite concubine Wen to come over. Mother looks good today, maybe she wants to talk to concubine Wen. Then the laughter went away, and after about half an hour, I saw a group of people pouring out of the Yunhai Palace, but it was more than a dozen eunuchs and palace maids who surrounded Pu Qiutai and went to the Tai Ning Palace. The Queen Mother's complexion is indeed okay today, otherwise I would not have been able to come out, but what is she looking for this concubine? It wasn't until the group of people disappeared from sight that Xia Dongming flashed out from behind the tree, staring at the direction where Pu Qiutai disappeared, and used his brain to ponder. Ah! A sudden exclamation woke Xia Dongming up from his trance, and when he looked back, it turned out that Zhu Shanyan and Zhu Mingfang came to the door because they were too worried. Who wanted to see him, so they screamed for a while. The poor two children were glared at by Xia Dongming, like frogs stared at by snakes, and they didn't dare to move. It wasn't until he saw the child who was 3 or 4 years younger than them walking in the door with his head held high that Zhu Mingfang reacted, took Zhu Shanyan's hand and shouted, "Brother! Run!" Then they turned their heads and ran into the palace. "Stop!" Xia Dongming roared, and when he saw the two eunuchs coming out of the hall, he raised his head and said, "You two. Tell them what they should do when they see that the prince does not pay homage." The two eunuchs saw that it was this little ancestor, and they didn't dare to say anything. So they hurriedly stopped the two sister and brother, and whispered, "Don't you dare to be disrespectful to His Royal Highness Crown Prince. The second prince has to salute when he sees him. You promised us that only if we. No, if you don't go out, won't come to us. The matter has come to this, Zhu Shanyan knows that he can't escape. Pu Qiutai went to the queen's palace, and there is no one in this Yunhai palace who dares to disobey the prince. So he stepped forward tremblingly, and still didn't forget to protect his sister behind him. I'm just here to hang out. Who said I'm looking for you? Xia Dongming raised his chin coldly, then pointed at Xu Shanyan and said, You come out, I have something to discuss with you. That's it. Just say it here. Xu Mingfang is sister. As soon as she heard that the other party told her brother to go out, thinking that her brother was beaten by him last time and was full of injuries, she immediately raised her vigilance in her heart, grabbed Xu Shanyan, and whispered, You can't go out with him. Uncle Pu said, Only in Yunhai Palace, we are safe. Shut up for me. Xia Dongming stared at Xu Mingfang. His eyes seemed to be able to breathe fire. He stepped forward in a few steps, grabbed Xu Shanyan's other hand, and said viciously to Xu Mingfang, I don't like to talk to you crooked women the most, and if you dare to be verbose, believe it or not, I will kick you to death. Don't, Xu Shanyan shouted, and then looked at the surrounding eunuchs and palace maids as if asking for help, but saw that they all lowered their eyes in unison, obviously making up their minds to stand by and watch. Then follow me. Xia Dongming pulled Xu Shanyan hard and dragged him to the gate. Xu Mingfang was so frightened that she cried and grabbed her brother's hand. But how could her strength resist Xia Dongming? Although he is 2 years younger than them, this is the master who has been practicing martial arts with the guards since he was a child. His Royal Highness Crown Prince. At this critical moment, I only heard a surprised voice from outside the courtyard gate, and then Xiao Beiji walked in, looked behind him hesitantly, and said in a low voice, Your Majesty, it is His Royal Highness Crown Prince here. Dongming, what are you doing here? Xia Linxuan felt relieved and walked in, looked at his son in surprise, and then stretched out his hand to pick him up, frowning, You are not in Tai Ning Palace. What are you doing in Yunhai Palace? Xia Dongming never dreamed of meeting his father. His brows furrowed, and he said unwillingly, Concubine Wen was summoned by the Queen Mother. I'm okay anyway, so I'll just come in and hang out. Your mother summoned Qiutai over? Xia Linxuan felt strange in his heart, but he didn't show it on his face. He glanced at Xu Shanyan and Xu Mingfang casually, and when he saw them huddled aside, he didn't say anything, and entered the hall with his son in his arms. When Pu Qiutai came back, Xia Dongming naturally wouldn't stay here and be embarrassed. He had already found a reason to run away. Here Xia Linxuan asked him what the queen summoned for. Pu Qiutai himself was still puzzled. So he shook his head and said, The minister doesn't know. The Queen Mother just said a few words to the minister, and she didn't have any instructions. Xia Linxuan nodded slightly, and said, When I came, I saw Dongming here, no matter how he said that he was also my prince. If you met, you would also give him a little bit of your gentle care for those 2 children. That would also be a poor child. Pu Qiutai said indifferently, His Royal Highness Crown Prince is eloquent and strategic, and he has the style of his father. Where is the need for his ministers to share any gentle care? What's more, he is the emperor's son, the queen loves him, and the palace concubines love him too late. Where is the turn of the ministers to come forward and pay for it? Xia Linxuan smiled slightly, and said lightly, What you said is chilling. It is clear that you will not give me any face. But I don't know, if I don't give Qiutai any face, will the 2 children still be able to live? I've seen unreasonable, but I've never seen such unreasonable. Pu Qiutai sighed, knowing that Xia Linxuan was unhappy, and he was dissatisfied with his attitude of not taking the prince to heart. But why didn't he want to think about it? Why do you want to take that arrogant and domineering child to heart? Because he's a kid? But he is clearly a child of the daimyo royal family, and most of them are hugging each other. So he has to join in the excitement by himself? He has not rested in the Yunhai Palace for a long time, and this night Xia Linxuan rested in the Yunhai Palace. Naturally it was another upheaval. Not to mention